The sound of shattered plates froze every conversation inside the diner. Hot coffee splashed across white tiles. A waitress stood trembling in disbelief. A powerful sheriff suddenly looked as though all the air had left his body. A gold badge gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. What happened in that moment would destroy a reputation built over decades. It would expose secrets an entire town preferred to ignore. It would prove that arrogance often collapses when truth finally arrives. Before that badge touched the floor, Harland Falls looked like the kind of place featured on postcards. The small Georgia town sat beneath wide southern skies and rows of carefully maintained homes. Neighbors waved from porches, church bells echoed through quiet streets. A red brick courthouse stood proudly in the center of town. Visitors saw order, tradition, and community. Most never stayed long enough to notice the fear hidden beneath the surface. The town was ruled by Sheriff Clayton Dawson. His face appeared on signs throughout the county. Residents saw his name everywhere they looked. He had held power for years without serious opposition. Many people praised him publicly, others stayed silent. The silence often said more than the praise. Black residents whispered different stories behind closed doors. Stories about unnecessary traffic stops, stories about humiliating searches, stories about being treated like outsiders in their own community. Those stories eventually reached federal investigators. One of them was Marcus Reed. He arrived quietly on a warm morning in a rented sedan coated with road dust. Nothing about his appearance attracted attention. He wore jeans, a dark polo shirt, and reading glasses resting above thoughtful eyes. He looked like a professor traveling between conferences. That appearance served a purpose. People rarely reveal their true selves when they know they are being observed. Marcus stepped inside Peyton's diner just after sunrise. The smell of fresh biscuits mixed with coffee and bacon grease. The jukebox played softly near the corner. Regular customers occupied familiar seats. Conversations drifted through the room like slow-moving clouds. Marcus chose a booth near the window and opened a notebook. He planned to eat breakfast, listen carefully, and learn what official reports could never fully capture. A waitress named Brenda Holloway greeted him with a warm smile. Years of hard work showed in her tired hands, yet kindness still filled her voice. She poured coffee and recommended the pancakes. Marcus accepted with appreciation. While she wrote his order, he noticed a photograph tucked into her apron pocket. It showed a young child laughing without a care in the world. Brenda's face softened immediately when she spoke about her grandson. For a brief moment, the worries of adulthood disappeared behind the joy of family. Marcus listened more than he talked. He watched the room. He noticed who spoke confidently and who measured every word. He recognized the familiar rhythm of small-town life. Years spent investigating civil rights violations had taught him patience. He understood that truth often arrived quietly. It revealed itself through ordinary conversations and casual observations. He simply needed time. That time ended when the diner door swung open with enough force to rattle the glass. Conversations weakened instantly. Several customers lowered their eyes. Others straightened in their seats. Sheriff Clayton Dawson entered with the confidence of a man accustomed to unquestioned authority. His uniform looked immaculate. His polished badge reflected the morning light. A younger deputy followed several steps behind, careful not to overshadow his superior. Dawson slowly surveyed the diner. His gaze moved across every table before settling on Marcus. Something changed in his expression. It was brief but unmistakable. Brenda noticed it immediately. So did a few long-time customers. The sheriff removed his sunglasses and approached the booth with deliberate steps. The room seemed to shrink around him. Marcus looked up calmly. Dawson stopped beside the table and studied him in silence. The sheriff's smile never reached his eyes. He asked where Marcus came from. He asked why he was visiting. Each question felt less like conversation and more like an interrogation. Marcus answered politely. He explained that he was simply passing through and stopping for breakfast. The explanation did not satisfy the sheriff. Dawson leaned closer. His voice hardened. The air inside the diner grew heavy. Forks stopped moving, coffee cooled untouched. Every person in the room sensed that something unpleasant was beginning. Marcus remained composed, but Brenda felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had witnessed this pattern before. Then Dawson placed both hands on the edge of the booth and demanded identification. The request was not made as a courtesy. It was delivered as an order. Marcus slowly reached for his wallet. Around them, silence spread through the diner like an approaching storm. Nobody knew how far the sheriff intended to go. Nobody knew that this ordinary breakfast was about to become the moment that changed Harland Falls forever. Sheriff Clayton Dawson examined Marcus Reed's driver's license as though searching for a hidden crime. His thick fingers gripped the card while every customer watched from a careful distance. The sheriff read Marcus's name aloud for the entire diner to hear. The performance felt deliberate. Public humiliation often begins with small displays of power. Marcus remained seated. He neither argued nor challenged the sheriff. Years of experience had taught him the value of patience. He understood that some people revealed their true nature when given enough room. Dawson seemed eager to prove that lesson true. The sheriff slowly turned the license over and inspected both sides. He asked why a man from Atlanta would travel through Harland Falls alone. Marcus answered calmly. He explained that he had stopped for breakfast while passing through the area. His voice never rose. His expression never changed. Dawson clearly disliked the response. The sheriff pulled a radio from his belt and requested a records check. He spoke loudly enough for every customer to hear. The message carried across the diner like an accusation. Several people exchanged uneasy glances. Others stared into their coffee cups. A crackle came through the radio moments later. Dispatch reported that Marcus had a completely clean record. No warrants, no citations, no arrests. Nothing suspicious appeared in the system. Instead of ending the encounter, the report seemed to frustrate Dawson even more. The sheriff's attention shifted toward Marcus's notebook resting on the table. Its pages contained handwritten observations. Dawson reached toward it casually, as though it already belonged to him. Marcus calmly placed a hand across the open page. His movement remained respectful but firm. He explained that the notebook contained personal notes. Dawson's eyes narrowed immediately. The atmosphere inside the diner tightened. Brenda froze beside the counter. An elderly customer lowered his newspaper. Even the soft music from the jukebox suddenly felt distant. Dawson leaned closer until his shadow covered the table. He explained that things worked differently in Harland Falls. According to him, questions were answered when he demanded answers. Property was surrendered when he demanded property. He insisted that his authority stood above everything else. Marcus listened without interruption. His silence only seemed to intensify the sheriff's irritation. Some people expected fear when they exercised power. Dawson appeared accustomed to immediate submission. Marcus offered neither fear nor resistance. He simply remained calm. The sheriff straightened and began speaking louder. He reminded everyone that Harland Falls was his town. He claimed that people who visited should follow his rules. Then his comments became personal. The words carried an unmistakable hostility that made several customers uncomfortable. Brenda felt her stomach sink. She had heard similar language before, not always this openly, not always this aggressively. Yet the underlying message never changed. Some people belonged. Others did not. Dawson made that distinction clear whenever he believed nobody important was watching. Marcus finally asked a simple question. He wanted to know whether he was being detained. The sheriff laughed dismissively. Instead of providing a direct answer, Dawson insisted that he alone decided what happened inside the county. The statement hung in the air like smoke. Several customers looked away. A mother seated near the window quietly pulled her daughter closer. The child stopped coloring and watched the adults with confused eyes. The tension spread across the room. Nobody wanted to become involved. Nobody wanted the sheriff's attention directed toward them. Dawson called for another deputy. His voice carried authority sharpened by years of control. Within minutes, an additional officer arrived. The young deputy paused briefly after entering. He immediately sensed something was wrong. 3 law enforcement officers now surrounded one unarmed man eating breakfast. The imbalance felt impossible to ignore. An older couple requested their check and left before finishing their meal. The truck driver seated at the counter remained silent, his jaw tightened with visible discomfort. Nobody spoke against the sheriff. Nobody defended Marcus either. The silence itself became a character inside the diner. It settled between tables and wrapped around every witness. Marcus noticed it. Brenda noticed it. Even Dawson seemed aware of its presence, yet nobody challenged it. Without warning, the sheriff ordered Marcus to stand. The command echoed through the room. Marcus slowly closed his notebook and placed his hands on the table. He repeated his earlier question. Was he being detained? Dawson responded with another threat disguised as authority. Marcus stood carefully. He kept his movements slow and visible. The deputies watched closely while customers held their breath. Dawson stepped behind him and began a search. His hands moved through pockets and along clothing in an exaggerated display intended for an audience. The sheriff eventually felt a rectangular object hidden inside Marcus's jacket pocket. He pressed against it briefly before moving on. He assumed it was an ordinary wallet or phone case. He never bothered to examine it further. That decision would soon become the most expensive mistake of his career. After completing the search, Dawson stepped back and dramatically claimed he smelled marijuana. The accusation stunned several customers. No unusual odor existed inside the diner. Marcus remained expressionless. One deputy immediately agreed with the sheriff. The younger deputy looked uncertain but said nothing. Dawson announced that Marcus was now being detained for suspected drug activity. He delivered the statement like a public service announcement. A few people stared in disbelief. Others lowered their eyes. Marcus stood quietly with his hands resting on the table. The sheriff expected anger. He expected fear. He expected some visible reaction. Instead, he encountered the same calm expression that had greeted him from the beginning. That calm unsettled him more than any argument ever could. Outside, dark clouds slowly gathered beyond the diner windows. Inside, something even heavier was forming. Dawson believed he was tightening his control over the situation. In reality, he had already taken another step toward a disaster he could not yet see. The next decision he made would push everything beyond the point of return. Sheriff Clayton Dawson dragged a chair across the tile floor and sat directly across from Marcus Reed. The scraping sound cut through the diner like a blade. Every customer watched without pretending otherwise. Breakfast had become a spectacle. Dawson rested both arms on the chair and stared at Marcus. His eyes carried the confidence of a man who believed consequences only applied to other people. The sheriff ordered Marcus to empty his pockets onto the table. His tone suggested the decision had already been made. Marcus reminded him that he had already been searched. Dawson ignored the comment completely. The command came again, slower, sharper, more demanding. Marcus understood the situation well enough to know that arguing would only feed the performance. One by one, he removed his belongings. A wallet, a cell phone, car keys, a pen. Each item landed quietly on the table. Dawson studied them as though expecting evidence of a major crime. The room remained silent. The sheriff opened the wallet and examined its contents. He counted the cash inside with exaggerated care. Every bill was held high enough for nearby customers to see. Dawson announced the total loudly, more than $300. The implication was obvious. He wanted the diner to assume something criminal. He wanted suspicion to replace facts. Marcus recognized the tactic immediately. He had seen similar performances in countless investigations. Brenda watched from behind the counter. Her hands trembled slightly while she wiped an already clean surface. She knew Marcus had done nothing wrong. Everyone in the diner knew it. Yet nobody interrupted the sheriff. Dawson picked up the phone next. He pressed the power button and waited for the screen to illuminate. A passcode prevented access. The sheriff demanded that Marcus unlock it immediately. Marcus calmly explained that a warrant would be required. The word warrant seemed to strike Dawson like an insult. His jaw tightened. A vein pulsed visibly along his temple. He placed the phone back onto the table with forced restraint. Several customers exchanged nervous glances. They recognized the danger of challenging the sheriff publicly. Dawson leaned forward until only a few inches separated him from Marcus. His voice dropped low enough that everyone strained to hear. He questioned whether rights truly mattered in Harland Falls. He suggested that nobody would care if a stranger disappeared. He pointed toward the surrounding customers as evidence. According to him, Marcus was alone. The statement lingered in the room. Some people looked ashamed. Others looked frightened. Nobody responded. Marcus simply met the sheriff's gaze. His calm expression remained unchanged. That composure confused Dawson. Every tactic he relied upon had failed. The intimidation, the public embarrassment, the threats. None of them produced the reaction he expected. The sheriff seemed unable to understand why. A younger deputy named Todd Barnes stood near the entrance. Unlike the others, he appeared increasingly uncomfortable. His eyes moved between Dawson and Marcus. Several times he looked ready to speak. Each time he remained silent. Dawson abruptly ordered Barnes to search Marcus's rental car. The young deputy hesitated. He asked whether a warrant existed. The question immediately changed the atmosphere inside the diner. For a brief moment, absolute silence settled over the room. Dawson turned toward Barnes slowly. His expression hardened. He claimed probable cause based on the alleged smell of marijuana. Then he ordered the search again. Barnes reluctantly obeyed. He left through the front door while every witness watched him disappear into the parking lot. The sheriff appeared satisfied. He seemed convinced that something incriminating would soon be discovered. Minutes passed slowly. Dawson wandered around the diner with a cup of coffee. He chatted casually with customers. He acted as though everything unfolding around him was completely normal. Yet beneath the performance, impatience grew. Marcus remained seated. His notebook rested nearby. He observed every detail, every comment, every expression. Brenda noticed him occasionally writing short notes. Something about that unsettled her. He looked less like a suspect and more like someone gathering information. Outside, the sky darkened further. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the county. The weather seemed to mirror the mood inside the diner. Pressure continued building. Everyone felt it. The truck driver seated at the counter stared into his coffee. An elderly farmer near the window repeatedly folded and unfolded his napkin. The mother with the young daughter whispered reassuring words. Nobody relaxed. Eventually, the diner door opened again. Barnes returned from the search. Dust clung to his shoes and pant legs. He looked exhausted, despite being gone only a short time. Every head turned toward him. Dawson immediately demanded answers. Barnes hesitated before speaking. Then he reported exactly what he found. Nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no contraband, nothing illegal whatsoever. The words struck the sheriff harder than anyone expected. His face tightened. The confidence began slipping from his expression. He had invested too much into the confrontation. He needed a reason to justify everything that had happened. Barnes quietly suggested that perhaps Marcus should simply be allowed to leave. The recommendation lasted only seconds before Dawson exploded. His voice cracked across the diner. The young deputy immediately fell silent. Several customers lowered their eyes again. The sheriff had received the answer he feared most. There was no evidence, no crime, no justification, nothing supported his actions. For the first time all morning, the crowd began seeing the truth clearly. Dawson was no longer investigating a suspicious traveler. He was desperately searching for a reason to validate his own behavior. The realization spread from table to table. It moved quietly but powerfully. The sheriff sensed it happening. His authority depended upon perception. The moment people questioned that perception, everything became dangerous. Instead of backing away, Dawson chose a different path. His pride refused retreat. His anger demanded escalation. The decision appeared in his eyes before he spoke a single word. He pointed directly at Marcus and issued another order. Stand up. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. This time, even some of his supporters looked shocked. The diner had witnessed everything. Everyone knew no evidence existed. Yet the sheriff was preparing to make the situation far worse. Marcus slowly rose from the booth. His face remained calm, but the look in his eyes suggested he already understood exactly where this reckless decision would lead. Dawson, however, remained completely blind to the disaster waiting only seconds away. Marcus Reed slowly pushed himself away from the booth and stood upright. Every eye inside the diner followed his movement. The room felt frozen in place. Even the music from the jukebox seemed distant now. Sheriff Clayton Dawson stepped forward, with growing frustration burning behind his eyes. The sheriff demanded compliance once more. His voice echoed across the diner. Marcus remained calm. He reminded Dawson that no evidence had been found. The vehicle search produced nothing. The records check produced nothing. The search of his person produced nothing. Those facts only fueled Dawson's anger. For years, the sheriff had controlled every room he entered. People rarely questioned him. Most obeyed without hesitation. Many feared becoming the next target of his attention. That power had shaped his identity. The idea of backing down now felt impossible. Marcus looked directly into the sheriff's eyes. "You are making a serious mistake," he said calmly. The words were neither a threat nor a warning. They sounded more like a statement of fact. Dawson heard them differently. The sheriff grabbed Marcus roughly and spun him around. The force startled several customers. Brenda gasped behind the counter. The truck driver at the bar tightened his fists. Still, nobody intervened. Marcus placed no resistance. He simply stood there. That made Dawson even angrier. The sheriff forced Marcus forward until his chest struck the table. Coffee sloshed from a nearby cup. The notebook slid across the surface. A pen rolled onto the floor. Metal handcuffs appeared in Dawson's hands. Click. Then another click. The sound echoed through the diner. A mother near the window covered her daughter's eyes. The little girl looked frightened. She could not understand why 3 officers needed to arrest a man who had been quietly eating breakfast. Dawson pulled Marcus upright by the collar. "My town, my rules," the sheriff declared. The statement sounded triumphant. Yet beneath the confidence, cracks were beginning to show. His voice carried a desperation that had not existed earlier. Marcus remained silent. His composure unsettled everyone. Most people placed in handcuffs would argue. Some would shout, others would plead. Marcus did none of those things. He looked almost thoughtful. As Dawson shoved him toward the exit, something unexpected happened. The movement pulled Marcus's jacket open. A leather credential holder slipped from the inner pocket. Nobody noticed immediately. The small item hit the tile floor and slid several feet beneath the bright fluorescent lights. It landed face up near the center aisle. Dawson never looked down. His attention remained fixed on the man he believed he had conquered. Marcus noticed the credential holder fall. For the briefest moment, his eyes followed it. Then he looked forward again. His expression never changed. The object remained on the floor. Waiting, Brenda Holloway had spent more than 2 decades working inside Peyton's diner. She had seen arguments, celebrations, heartbreak, and countless ordinary mornings. Through all those years, she survived by keeping her head down and avoiding trouble. That habit was about to end. Trying to distract herself from what she was witnessing, Brenda gathered dirty dishes from nearby tables. Her hands moved automatically through familiar motions, plates stacked, cups balanced. A heavy tray settled onto her arm. She turned toward the kitchen, then she saw it. The leather credential holder, the gold badge, the photograph, the official identification. 3 bold letters stood out immediately. DOJ. The Department of Justice. Brenda froze. For one endless second, her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. Then everything crashed. The tray slipped from her hands, plates shattered across the floor, coffee exploded across the tiles. Ceramic fragments scattered in every direction. The noise shocked the entire diner. Conversations stopped, customers jumped. Dawson turned around angrily. "What are you doing?" he snapped. Then he saw Brenda's face. The anger disappeared instantly. She was staring at the floor, terrified, confused, unable to look anywhere else. The sheriff followed her gaze. His eyes settled on the credential holder. At first, confusion crossed his face, then recognition, then something much darker. Fear, pure fear. The color drained from his face. Every customer watched the transformation happen in real time. The powerful sheriff, who had controlled the room all morning, suddenly looked like a man standing on collapsing ground. Dawson slowly released his grip on Marcus's collar. The diner became silent again. Not ordinary silence, the kind that arrives when people realize they are witnessing the exact moment everything changes. Marcus calmly turned around. The handcuffs remained on his wrists. The sheriff remained frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the deputies looked confused. Marcus finally broke the silence. His voice remained steady. "Sheriff Dawson, my name is Marcus Reed. I am a senior investigator with the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division." The words landed like thunder. A customer whispered a prayer. Another dropped his coffee cup. Deputy Barnes closed his eyes. Brenda covered her mouth with trembling hands. Everything suddenly made sense. The calm, the notebook, the questions, the confidence. Marcus had not been trapped inside the diner. The sheriff had trapped himself. Marcus continued speaking. He explained that he had come to Harland Falls to examine multiple complaints involving unconstitutional stops and detentions. He explained that his visit was part of an ongoing federal inquiry. Then he glanced down at the handcuffs. "I did not expect to become evidence myself," he said quietly. No one breathed. Dawson's hands began shaking. For the first time in many years, the sheriff appeared completely powerless, and the worst part was still coming. Because hanging above the register, blinking patiently the entire morning, a security camera had recorded every single word. The blinking security camera above the register suddenly became the most important object inside Peyton's diner. Every person in the room seemed to notice it at the same moment. The small red light had witnessed everything. Every insult, every threat, every unlawful command, every second of humiliation. Sheriff Clayton Dawson stared at the camera as if seeing it for the first time. His confidence vanished. The swagger disappeared. The man who had entered the diner believing he controlled everything now looked trapped. Marcus Reed remained calm. The handcuffs still circled his wrists, yet somehow he appeared to be the only person fully in control of the situation. "Take them off," Marcus said. The request was quiet. Nobody mistook it for a suggestion. Dawson fumbled for the key. His hands trembled noticeably. The metal clicked open. The cuffs fell away from Marcus's wrists and landed on the table. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. Several customers released breaths they did not realize they had been holding. Deputy Todd Barnes looked relieved. Deputy Colt Sheffer looked terrified. Brenda bent down and carefully picked up the federal credentials. She examined them briefly. The badge was genuine. The identification was genuine. Everything was real. Her hands shook as she carried the credentials to Marcus. He accepted them with a simple nod. Then Brenda made a decision that would change her life. She walked behind the counter. She picked up the phone, and she dialed the number printed on the credential card. The entire diner watched. Nobody stopped her. Nobody even tried. When someone answered, Brenda introduced herself. Her voice trembled at first. Then it grew stronger. She explained exactly what had happened. She described the detention, the threats, the false accusations, the handcuffs. The entire room listened. Sheriff Dawson looked as though he wanted to interrupt. Yet for perhaps the first time in years, he had no idea what to say. Marcus returned to his booth. He stepped over broken ceramic pieces and pulled his notebook closer. Then he began writing. That simple action frightened Dawson more than anything else. Every insult he had spoken, every unlawful order, every racial slur, every threat. Marcus recorded them carefully, line by line, fact by fact. The sheriff watched the pen move across the paper. His face grew paler. Minutes passed. Nobody left. Nobody spoke above a whisper. The atmosphere felt surreal. It was as if the diner existed outside normal time. Then Dawson finally moved. He approached Marcus's booth again. This time, however, he looked nothing like the man who had started the confrontation. The authority was gone. The certainty was gone. What remained was desperation. "Let's talk about this," he said. Marcus never looked up. "There is nothing to discuss," he replied. Dawson swallowed hard. He attempted another approach. He called the incident a misunderstanding. He described it as routine police work. He suggested that perhaps things had simply gotten out of hand. The excuses sounded weak even to him. Marcus finally looked up. His eyes remained steady. "Your side of this situation was recorded," he said. Then he pointed toward the security camera. Dawson followed the gesture. His shoulders sagged. For the first time all morning, he seemed to understand the scale of the disaster. The camera had not blinked. The witnesses had not disappeared. The evidence existed. And it was devastating. Customers who had remained silent earlier now looked at him differently. Not with respect, not with admiration, with disappointment. Even fear. The illusion surrounding his authority had begun to crack. Deputy Barnes shifted near the door. He looked at the sheriff. Then he looked away. That small gesture revealed everything. Loyalty was already fading. Marcus closed his notebook. "You were doing exactly what I came here to investigate," he said. The statement struck harder than any accusation. Dawson opened his mouth. No words emerged. The truth had cornered him. Outside, rain finally began falling. Drops struck the windows in steady patterns. Dark clouds covered the sky. The weather mirrored the mood inside the diner. Heavy, unavoidable, consequences were arriving. Approximately 40 minutes later, two unmarked vehicles rolled into the gravel parking lot. Customers watched through rain-streaked glass. The arriving officials carried themselves differently from local deputies. They moved with purpose, with confidence, with authority that did not need to announce itself. Dawson recognized the vehicles immediately. His expression tightened. Another vehicle arrived soon afterward, then another. The parking lot gradually filled. Brenda looked outside and felt a chill run through her body. Harland Falls had spent years pretending certain problems did not exist. Now those problems had arrived at the front door, carrying official credentials. Inside the diner, Marcus calmly packed away his notebook. The investigation had changed dramatically. He had arrived hoping to observe. Instead, he had become living evidence. And as the first federal officials stepped through the diner entrance, Sheriff Clayton Dawson finally realized a terrible truth. Everything he had built over decades was beginning to collapse. And the people arriving through those doors were only the beginning. Rain hammered the windows of Peyton's diner as federal vehicles filled the parking lot. The storm outside seemed determined to match the storm unfolding inside. Customers gathered near the glass, watching unfamiliar officials step from unmarked sedans. Nobody in Harland Falls had seen anything like this before. Sheriff Clayton Dawson stood motionless near the entrance. His deputies remained silent. The customers remained silent. Even the storm seemed quieter than the tension gripping the room. Marcus Reed sat calmly in his booth, reviewing notes he had written only minutes earlier. The same notebook that had triggered suspicion now contained the beginning of a federal case. Every observation mattered. Every statement mattered. Every witness mattered. The front door opened. Several investigators entered. They did not rush. They did not raise their voices. Authority radiated from them naturally. One official approached Marcus directly. The two exchanged a brief handshake. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. Yet that simple gesture confirmed everything. Marcus belonged there. Dawson did not. The officials immediately began securing evidence. The security camera footage became their first priority. Copies were requested. Backup systems were examined. Statements were collected from employees. Every step followed procedure. The professionalism contrasted sharply with the chaos Dawson had created. Brenda remained behind the counter while an investigator recorded her account. She described everything she had witnessed from the moment Marcus entered the diner. The questions were thorough but respectful. For the first time all day, she felt somebody genuinely cared about the truth. Nearby, customers provided their own statements. The truck driver spoke. The elderly couple who had returned after hearing what happened spoke. The mother near the window spoke. Even the quiet farmer wearing a worn cap agreed to talk. One by one, people who had remained silent during the confrontation found their voices. Deputy Todd Barnes sat with investigators inside a separate section of the diner. His nervous expression revealed an internal struggle. Loyalty pulled him one direction, conscience pulled him another. Eventually, conscience won. Barnes described the vehicle search. He admitted finding nothing illegal. He acknowledged questioning the legality of the situation. His words came slowly at first, then faster. Years of suppressed doubt seemed to pour out all at once. Across the room, Deputy Colt Sheffer watched nervously. The confidence he displayed earlier had vanished. Sweat gathered along his forehead despite the cool temperature. He understood exactly what Barnes's cooperation meant. The foundation beneath the sheriff was crumbling. Sheriff Dawson attempted to speak with investigators several times. His explanations sounded increasingly desperate. He insisted that everything had been routine. He claimed public safety concerns justified his actions. He argued that officers sometimes needed flexibility. The investigators listened politely. Then they continued documenting evidence. No one appeared convinced. Hours passed. The rain continued. News of the incident spread rapidly through Harland Falls. Residents began gathering outside the diner. Some arrived out of curiosity. Others arrived because they had their own experiences with the sheriff's department. Rumors traveled through churches, barber shops, gas stations, and neighborhood gatherings. Something important was happening. People could feel it. Marcus eventually stepped outside beneath a covered awning. The rain fell steadily beyond the shelter. He watched water stream across the parking lot while reviewing messages on his phone. Several came from colleagues. Others came from supervisors. One message simply read, "Stay safe, we have your back." Marcus smiled faintly. Inside the diner, Dawson received very different news. A county official had arrived. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes. Nobody could hear every word, yet everyone could see the result. The sheriff's shoulders sagged visibly, his face turned pale. Whatever he had been told was serious, very serious. Brenda noticed it immediately. So did Barnes. So did every customer watching from nearby tables. The conversation ended. The county official walked away. Dawson remained standing alone. For years he had projected certainty. Now uncertainty surrounded him. The image was shocking. Late that afternoon, another federal attorney arrived from Atlanta. She entered, carrying folders and legal documents. Her reputation was well known among investigators. When she met Marcus, they exchanged only a few words. That brief interaction told observers everything they needed to know. This case had become important, very important. The attorney reviewed witness statements. She examined evidence. She watched portions of the security footage. Her expression hardened with every passing minute. Meanwhile, residents continued arriving outside. Some shared stories quietly among themselves. Stories about questionable traffic stops. Stories about intimidation. Stories about relatives treated unfairly. For years, many believed nobody would listen. Now federal investigators were listening, and people were finally talking. As evening approached, the storm began fading. Grey clouds slowly parted across the horizon. Faint sunlight appeared between them. The timing felt symbolic. Inside the diner, officials completed another round of interviews. Outside, townspeople continued gathering. The atmosphere had changed completely. Fear was no longer the dominant emotion. Hope was replacing it. Then, just before sunset, a decision was announced. The news moved through the diner like an electric current. Sheriff Clayton Dawson had been placed on immediate administrative suspension, pending a federal investigation. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The words seemed impossible. The most powerful man in Harland Falls had just lost control of the office that defined his identity. Dawson stared ahead in disbelief. Yet an even greater shock was waiting, because suspension was only the beginning. And by sunrise the next day, people throughout the county would begin sharing stories that threatened to expose far more than a single afternoon inside a diner. The announcement spread through Harland Falls faster than any storm. By nightfall, nearly everyone in town had heard the same unbelievable news. Sheriff Clayton Dawson had been suspended pending a federal investigation. People repeated the words cautiously at first, almost afraid they were not true. For years, Dawson seemed untouchable. Now the armor surrounding him was cracking. The following morning, Peyton's diner looked different. The same coffee brewed, the same booths lined the windows, the same jukebox played familiar songs, yet an invisible weight had lifted from the room. Customers arrived carrying questions instead of fear. Brenda Holloway noticed the change immediately. People spoke more openly. They lingered longer. They shared stories. Many stories sounded disturbingly similar. A mechanic described being stopped repeatedly without explanation. A retired teacher recalled being searched on the side of a road while neighbors watched. A young father spoke about officers questioning him simply for driving through certain neighborhoods. Each story sounded slightly different. The pattern never changed. Federal investigators established a temporary office nearby. Telephones rang constantly. Emails arrived every hour. Residents who had spent years remaining silent suddenly found the courage to speak. Marcus Reed spent most of the day reviewing statements. Every new complaint expanded the investigation. Every witness added another piece to a growing puzzle. What began as two formal complaints was becoming something much larger, something systemic, something impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Clayton Dawson sat alone inside his home on the edge of town. The silence surrounding him felt unfamiliar. His phone no longer rang constantly, supporters stopped calling, deputies stopped seeking guidance. Political allies suddenly became difficult to reach. Power has a way of disappearing quickly when consequences arrive. Dawson spent hours replaying the events inside the diner, again and again. He remembered Marcus's calm expression. He remembered the badge sliding across the floor. He remembered the security camera. Most of all, he remembered the moment fear entered his own chest. The memory haunted him. At the federal office, investigators continued interviewing witnesses. One of the most important conversations involved Deputy Todd Barnes. The young officer finally decided complete honesty was his only option. Barnes described incidents reaching back several years. Questionable traffic stops, unnecessary searches, pressure from supervisors, informal instructions never written in official reports. The more he talked, the heavier he seemed to feel, like a man setting down a burden he had carried too long. Investigators listened carefully. Every detail was documented. Every allegation was verified where possible. Across town, Deputy Colt Sheffer faced his own crisis. Unlike Barnes, he initially remained loyal to Dawson. He repeated official explanations. He defended departmental actions. He insisted procedures had been followed. Yet the evidence continued growing. Witnesses contradicted his statements. Video recordings contradicted his statements. Documents contradicted his statements. The pressure mounted. Days passed. More complaints arrived. Then more. Then even more. Church leaders encouraged residents to come forward. Community organizers helped collect information. Pastors opened meeting spaces for concerned families. People who once believed their voices carried no value finally felt heard. Marcus attended several community gatherings. He spent most of his time listening. That was one of his greatest strengths. He understood that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. Residents noticed the difference. Unlike many officials who visited briefly and disappeared, Marcus treated every story with respect. Every person mattered. Every experience mattered. One evening, Brenda attended a community meeting held inside a local church. The sanctuary filled beyond capacity. Families crowded into pews. Late arrivals stood along walls. The atmosphere felt emotional. Hope mixed with pain, frustration mixed with relief. People finally spoke truths they had hidden for years. During the meeting, an elderly man slowly stood. His voice trembled. He described decades of silence. He described teaching younger generations to avoid trouble by avoiding attention. Then he paused. Tears filled his eyes. "Nobody should have to live that way," he said. The room fell silent. Many nodded, others wiped away tears. Brenda thought about her grandson Caleb. She imagined the future she wanted for him. A future without fear. A future without humiliation. A future where fairness was not treated like a privilege. The thought strengthened her resolve. Back at the federal office, investigators began analyzing years of departmental records. Traffic stop reports, arrest reports, search reports. Statistical patterns emerged quickly. The numbers told a story remarkably similar to witness testimony. Black residents were stopped more frequently, searched more frequently, questioned more aggressively. The data supported what the community had been saying all along. The findings alarmed investigators. They also alarmed county leaders. Officials who previously defended Dawson now faced uncomfortable questions. Several publicly distanced themselves from him. Others remained silent. The political landscape shifted rapidly. Then another development shook the county. Deputy Colt Sheffer requested a private meeting with investigators. The news spread quietly through law enforcement circles. Nobody knew what he planned to say. But experienced investigators recognized the signs. People usually request private meetings for one reason: they are preparing to talk. And if Sheffer decided to tell the truth, the investigation would move from troubling allegations to something far more dangerous for Clayton Dawson. Because some secrets can survive public suspicion, very few survive insider testimony. Deputy Colt Sheffer arrived at the federal office shortly before sunset. The building stood quiet beneath a sky painted with fading orange light. Inside, investigators waited in a conference room surrounded by folders, witness statements, and years of departmental records. Sheffer looked exhausted. The confidence that once followed him everywhere had disappeared. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. His hands trembled slightly when he accepted a cup of coffee. Everyone in the room understood what this meeting represented. Truth was about to collide with loyalty. For several minutes, nobody rushed him. The silence allowed him to think, to choose, to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Finally, Sheffer spoke. The first words came slowly, then faster, then everything began pouring out. Years of instructions, years of unwritten policies, years of pressure. The stories matched what investigators had already been hearing from residents across Harland County. According to Sheffer, Sheriff Clayton Dawson frequently used the same phrase, "Find a reason." That instruction guided countless encounters. If no legitimate justification existed, officers were expected to create one. A broken taillight, a suspicious glance, an air freshener hanging from a mirror. Anything would do. The objective remained the same. Find a reason. Investigators documented every word. Names were recorded, dates were recorded, specific incidents were recorded. The case grew stronger by the hour. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed reviewed newly submitted complaints from local residents. The number had increased dramatically. More people came forward every day. Some described events from recent months. Others shared experiences reaching back several years. Different stories, different families, different circumstances, the same pattern. The consistency became impossible to dismiss. Community meetings continued throughout the county. Churches remained full. Neighborhood centers remained crowded. Families gathered to discuss what was happening. For many residents, something unfamiliar had appeared. Hope, not certainty, not victory, hope. The belief that accountability might finally be possible. Brenda Holloway attended another gathering one evening after work. Rain tapped softly against church windows while community members shared experiences. The atmosphere felt emotional yet determined. People were no longer whispering. They were speaking openly. A young mother described teaching her children what to do during traffic stops. An elderly veteran described being treated like a suspect despite decades of honorable service. A college student recalled being searched while walking home from class. The room listened. Nobody interrupted. Nobody judged. Each story strengthened the next. Across town, Clayton Dawson faced growing isolation. Television news crews arrived regularly. Reporters called daily. Questions followed him everywhere. Friends who once sought photographs with him suddenly avoided public association. The change happened quickly. Power often attracts companions. Consequences often reveal who remains afterward. Dawson spent most of his time speaking with attorneys. They reviewed evidence. They reviewed witness statements. They reviewed security footage. The discussions became increasingly difficult. The facts refused to cooperate with the defense. The video showed everything. The witnesses confirmed everything. The documentation supported everything. The reality was impossible to escape. One afternoon, federal analysts completed a comprehensive review of departmental statistics. The findings were alarming. Traffic stop rates, search rates, detention rates. Every category revealed significant disparities. The numbers transformed community concerns into measurable evidence. Data succeeded where denial failed. County leaders received preliminary briefings. Some reacted with disbelief. Others reacted with embarrassment. A few reacted with anger. Yet none could ignore the conclusions. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus understood that statistics alone never tell the full story. Behind every number stood a person, a family, a memory, a moment of humiliation. That perspective remained central to his work. The investigation was never just about policies, it was about people. Days later, federal prosecutors reviewed the growing case file. Boxes of documents filled conference tables. Witness statements stretched across hundreds of pages. Evidence continued arriving. The question was no longer whether wrongdoing occurred. The question had become how extensive it truly was. Then another significant development occurred. Phone records surfaced. Several communications connected directly to witnesses involved in the investigation. The timing raised serious concerns. Investigators examined the calls carefully. The details suggested possible attempts to influence testimony. If confirmed, the consequences would be severe. Very severe. Federal prosecutors immediately expanded their review. Potential civil rights violations were already under examination. Now additional issues appeared on the horizon. The legal danger surrounding Dawson continued growing. Inside Peyton's diner, customers discussed the latest developments over coffee and breakfast. The conversation sounded different now. Fear no longer controlled them. Accountability dominated the discussion. Brenda occasionally glanced toward the booth where Marcus first sat. The seat remained ordinary, yet everyone understood its significance. History had changed there. One ordinary breakfast, one ordinary notebook, one extraordinary consequence. Late one evening, Marcus received a message from federal prosecutors. The grand jury had completed another review. Important decisions were approaching, very important decisions. Marcus looked out the window toward the dark Georgia sky. Months of work were beginning to converge. Witnesses had spoken. Evidence had been gathered. Records had been analyzed. Now the justice system would decide its next move. And somewhere across town, Clayton Dawson was about to learn that the investigation he once mocked had reached a point where even the most powerful local sheriff could no longer stop what was coming. The federal grand jury met behind closed doors while Harland County waited anxiously. Rumors moved through neighborhoods, churches, workplaces, and community gatherings. Everyone knew a major decision was approaching. Nobody knew exactly when it would arrive. Marcus Reed spent those days reviewing final reports with prosecutors. The investigation had grown far beyond the incident inside Peyton's diner. What began as a routine observation assignment had uncovered years of troubling conduct. Witness statements filled entire shelves. Evidence filled multiple case files. The story was no longer about one unlawful detention, it was about a pattern, a system, a culture that had survived because too many people believed nobody would challenge it. Federal prosecutors worked carefully. Every allegation required verification, every document required review, every witness required corroboration. The process moved methodically. Justice demanded patience. Meanwhile, community members continued coming forward. The number of complaints kept growing. Some residents arrived carrying documents. Others brought photographs. Several arrived with years of memories they had never shared publicly. Many admitted they expected nothing to happen. Now they felt differently. Hope had become contagious. Brenda Holloway watched the transformation unfold from behind the diner counter. Customers discussed legal developments instead of remaining silent. Conversations that once happened only in private now happened openly. The change felt remarkable. For decades, fear had controlled too many voices. Now truth was beginning to replace fear. One afternoon, Deputy Todd Barnes received unexpected news. Federal prosecutors had accepted his cooperation. His honesty would be considered during future proceedings. The young deputy sat quietly after learning the decision. Relief washed across his face. So did guilt. He understood that cooperation could not erase the past. Yet it represented a chance to do something right, a chance he desperately needed. Across town, Clayton Dawson's situation continued deteriorating. Media attention intensified. Television crews appeared regularly. National reporters began requesting interviews. Former supporters avoided public comments. Political allies remained silent. The isolation became impossible to ignore. Dawson spent most of his time meeting with attorneys. Each meeting seemed heavier than the last. Evidence continued emerging. Witnesses continued cooperating. The legal reality grew increasingly difficult to escape. Then the grand jury reached its decision. The news arrived on a quiet morning. Federal indictments were approved. Multiple charges, serious charges. The announcement spread across Georgia within hours. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Online headlines appeared everywhere. Harland County became national news. Residents gathered in small groups to discuss the development. Many appeared stunned, others appeared relieved. Some simply stood quietly, absorbing the moment. For years, accountability seemed impossible. Now it stood directly in front of them. Federal agents arrived at Dawson's residence before sunrise. The neighborhood remained dark. Porch lights glowed softly through the morning mist. Birds had not yet begun singing. The world felt suspended between night and day. Two agents approached the house. Professional, calm, prepared. The encounter remained respectful, yet its significance was unmistakable. The man who once ordered handcuffs placed on others now found himself facing the same reality. News cameras captured the aftermath. The images spread rapidly. People across the country saw the former sheriff walking beside federal agents. The symbolism was impossible to miss. At Peyton's diner, customers watched coverage from a television mounted near the counter. Nobody celebrated. The atmosphere felt too serious for celebration. Instead, many reflected quietly. Accountability matters. But accountability also reveals damage. And the damage in Harland County ran deep. Marcus continued assisting prosecutors as preparations began for trial. Witnesses would testify, experts would testify, records would be introduced, video evidence would be presented. The courtroom battle promised to be significant. Brenda received a call from prosecutors requesting her testimony. The request made her nervous. She had never testified in a major federal case. The responsibility felt enormous. That evening, she sat alone at her kitchen table. Family photographs surrounded her. One image captured young Caleb smiling beside a birthday cake. Brenda stared at the picture for a long time. Then she remembered why she picked up the phone that day. Not because she was fearless, because she was tired of looking away. That realization strengthened her resolve. The weeks leading to trial moved quickly. Attorneys finalized strategies. Witnesses prepared statements. Investigators organized evidence. Everything pointed toward a courtroom where years of conduct would finally face public scrutiny. The community watched closely. Some hoped for justice. Others feared disappointment. Everyone understood the stakes. One evening before trial, Marcus returned briefly to Peyton's diner. He sat in the same booth near the window. Rain tapped gently against the glass. Brenda brought him coffee. Neither spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. Both understood how far the journey had traveled since that first breakfast. After several minutes, Marcus opened his notebook. The same notebook, the same careful handwriting, the same quiet determination. Brenda glanced toward the pages. "Do you think people will finally be heard?" she asked softly. Marcus considered the question. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said. His answer carried certainty, not because the outcome was guaranteed, because the truth was finally impossible to ignore. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the horizon. Another storm was approaching. This time, however, the storm would arrive inside a federal courtroom. And before it ended, 12 jurors would decide whether Clayton Dawson spent the rest of his life remembered as a respected sheriff or as the man whose own arrogance destroyed everything he spent decades building. The federal courthouse stood beneath a gray morning sky as crowds gathered outside. Reporters lined the sidewalks. Cameras pointed toward the entrance. Community members arrived quietly, carrying years of memories that had finally reached this moment. Inside, the courtroom filled early. Families occupied wooden benches. Attorneys reviewed documents. Court officers moved with practiced efficiency. The atmosphere felt heavy, not dramatic, not theatrical, serious. Everyone understood that the verdict would reach beyond a single defendant. It would speak to an entire community. Clayton Dawson sat beside his attorneys. The former sheriff looked older than he had months earlier. The confidence that once defined him seemed distant. Years of authority could not protect him here. Inside a courtroom, evidence mattered more than reputation. Marcus Reed entered quietly. As always, he avoided attention. He carried no sense of triumph, only purpose. The same purpose that brought him to Harland County in the first place. Truth. The trial unfolded over several days. Witness after witness took the stand. Residents described encounters they never expected to discuss publicly. Some spoke with confidence, others fought through visible emotion. Yet every testimony added another piece to the story. A mechanic described repeated stops without justification. A mother described humiliation in front of her children. A student described being treated like a criminal while simply walking home. The details varied. The pattern remained consistent. Then Brenda Holloway testified. The courtroom grew especially quiet. She described the morning inside Peyton's diner, the coffee, the pancakes, the notebook, the insults, the handcuffs, the badge sliding across the floor. Her voice trembled briefly when she mentioned her grandson, Caleb. Then she steadied herself. "I kept thinking about the future," she said. "I kept thinking about what kind of world he deserves." Several jurors listened carefully. Others took notes. Nobody looked away. Deputy Todd Barnes testified next. His testimony carried significant weight. He admitted his own failures. He acknowledged remaining silent when he should have spoken. The honesty was painful, yet it mattered. Truth often requires admitting uncomfortable things. Later, Colt Sheffer testified. His account lasted hours. Names, dates, instructions, patterns. The details painted a troubling picture of departmental culture. Federal analysts followed with statistical evidence. Charts and reports transformed individual stories into measurable facts. The numbers confirmed what witnesses had described. Disparities existed. They were significant. They were persistent. Marcus eventually took the stand. His testimony remained calm and precise. He described everything exactly as it happened. No exaggeration, no emotion, only facts. The diner encounter, the false accusation, the detention, the handcuffs, the security camera. The jurors watched closely. His composure carried its own power. When testimony ended, closing arguments began. Attorneys presented competing narratives. One side argued mistakes had been made, the other argued something much deeper had occurred. Then the case went to the jury. The wait felt endless. Families gathered in hallways, reporters prepared updates, residents across Harland County followed developments closely. Hours later, the jury returned. The courtroom filled again. Silence settled across the room. Every person understood the significance of the moment. The verdict was read. Guilty. Then another guilty finding. Then another. Each word landed with unmistakable force. Some people cried quietly, others simply closed their eyes. Years of frustration. Years of fear. Years of silence. The verdict could not erase those experiences, but it acknowledged them. That mattered. During sentencing, the judge spoke carefully. He emphasized the responsibility attached to public trust. He reminded everyone that authority exists to serve communities, not control them. His words resonated throughout the courtroom. When the hearing ended, Clayton Dawson was escorted away. The image contrasted sharply with the man who once entered Peyton's diner, believing himself untouchable. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed to gather reactions. Many community members declined interviews. The moment felt too personal, too meaningful. Brenda stood quietly near the courthouse steps. Marcus approached before leaving. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Brenda smiled. "Thank you," she said. Marcus shook his head gently. "You made the call," he replied. The words stayed with her. Months later, meaningful reforms transformed the sheriff's department. New oversight measures appeared. Additional training programs were implemented. Transparency increased. Community involvement expanded. Progress did not happen overnight. Real change rarely does. Yet change had begun. At Peyton's diner, life slowly returned to normal. Coffee still brewed every morning. The jukebox still played familiar songs. Customers still gathered at favorite tables, but one thing was different. The photograph of Clayton Dawson no longer hung behind the register. In its place stood a framed picture of Brenda Holloway smiling beside friends and neighbors. A reminder, not of power, of courage. Marcus eventually moved on to another assignment, another town, another investigation, another notebook. He never sought recognition, he never chased attention. The work itself mattered more. Back in Harland County, residents continued rebuilding trust one step at a time. The journey remained imperfect, but it was moving forward. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. Darkness survives when people look away. Light appears when ordinary people decide they will not. One phone call, one witness, one act of courage. Sometimes that is all it takes to begin changing an entire community. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, your viewing location, and share this video.